thanks for having me on. It's an honor and a privilege. Um, my dad was a career naval officer. So we grew up in a household where business was never discussed. If my parents had friends who were not in the military, I really wasn't aware of it. And of course, we never stayed in one place long enough to learn about any of the local businesses. So when I look back on it, I think uh, the reason this all happened was really a why not me attitude. Uh, I went to college. My senior year, I was a dorm counselor, and there was another dorm counselor who had had a job with the Joint Economic Committee on Capitol Hill. I thought that was cool. I asked him for contact information. He said, sure. I contacted the folks. Then I get this letter saying there'd be no interns. And I'm sort of like, well, wait a minute. Why not me? And I had a reason to go to Washington, and I went down there and I gave the letter to my contact, and he said, I've never seen this letter. What do you mean there are no interns? So then it was not about me, it was about Republicans and Democrats. They quickly decided to have an intern. And then I got lucky because my contact was through the most senior Republican on the committee from New Jersey, Mr. Widnall. And he said, we only got this internship because of this kid from Wharton. If he wants it, it's his. And of course, I wanted it. So I got to spend the summer on Capitol Hill. My primary achievement, Bob, had nothing to do with real estate because that's where I met my wife, Debbie. But in August, they had hearings on manufactured housing. Nobody on the staff was interested in manufactured housing, but one of the congressmen wanted the hearings. So they said, we'll let the kid do it. And so I was the staff for that hearing, and I got really interested in it. It was the first time I'd ever heard anything about real estate. So
And you were what, 20 years old?
20, 21.
Yeah.
So the next year, I'm curious about real estate. So I was going to graduate school. So I started taking courses in city planning. And by that time, Debbie and I are engaged. And I needed to find a job around Washington, D.C. So another dorm counselor had worked for several years for the Rouse Company in Baltimore. He said, you ought to talk to them. So they were coming to town to interview. And I went and it was interviewed, and I was offered a summer job in their marketing department. And that's when the hook was set. I loved it. The company was very entrepreneurial. It was commercial real estate, and I learned a lot. So I was lucky enough to get a full-time job when I graduated, and that's how I got into real estate. All of us have times in our lives when you do something, or somebody does something, or somebody says something, and you're like, wow, that was profound. I need to try to remember that. And those are what I call pearls of wisdom. My first pearl of wisdom was basically when it's crunch time, when you're under high stress, human nature says you rely on the things that you're strongest at. You rely on your strengths. And I had a crew coach in college who said to me, that's backwards. Your strengths are probably already good enough for the situation. What you need to focus on are your weaknesses. And so the pearl of wisdom is crunch time, focus on your weaknesses. I'm very analytical and strategic. I am terrible at managing people or understanding the nuances of what's going on. And in the context of rowing, I was very strong. That was great. But a boat goes fast because of strength and rhythm. And as the coach pointed out to me, when God passed out rhythm, I was not in the line. So he said, when they tell you it's crunch time, really lean into it. Don't. Think rhythm. Try to be smooth. And it made a huge difference. And so in my career, in those moments, I always try to take time to step back and say, okay, I've got the analytics nailed. What are the nuances? What don't I hear? And one of the early pearls of wisdom was we were negotiating to buy out a institutional partner in a project we had developed. And we get on the phone with this guy, and my partner immediately passes a scrap piece of paper across to me and says, "Don't budge on the price." And I'd done all these spreadsheets and stuff, and I thought that our project was probably worth 13 million and we were offering 11. Well, the guy takes 11. And I'm like, I can't believe it. So we get off the call and I say to Pete, "How did you know?" Pete said, "Well, we've been working with this guy for about 3 years, and I've noticed that every time he really wants something, the tone of his voice goes up marginally." We got on the phone call and this guy's voice went up marginally. I didn't notice it, but Pete did. And Pete was like, "Wait a minute. This guy wants to sell more than we want to buy. So let's stick to our price."
I love it.
Pearl of wisdom. Your default perception is, where can I get the best deal? And that's not where you want to be. Where you want to be is, what do I think of these people? Are they honest? Do they speak the truth? Are they fair-minded? And you call around and you ask, what's their personality like? And you get,
Will they be in the foxhole with you tomorrow morning?
well, that's true. That's true. And what I found was that if you're in real estate and you're looking for partners, friends and family is the place to go. If you know that, you should try that. And what you're looking for is cash for somebody to put in the deal. Their guarantees on a bank loan and stuff like that, when the crap hits the fan, they run and hide. The other thing is that when you're talking on the institutional side, everybody says they're a long-term investor. Well, you might be thinking 15 or 20 years. They're thinking 3 to 5. And there's not anything wrong with that if you realize that and you say, okay, in 3 to 5, maybe 7 years, I'm going to have to replace these folks. The other key thing is sort of, how do they go about doing their business? And there are different styles in any business, including real estate development. And I went into a deal once, and it became apparent pretty quickly that my style of how I did things was different than the other person. And there was nothing wrong with what that other person did. It was just a whole different approach than what I like to do. And the analogy is, you got two chefs in the kitchen and they cook differently. And you can either have a fight in the kitchen and produce pretty lousy food, or somebody can get up and walk away so the other person can be themselves. And in that particular situation, I was like, you know what, Chris, you shouldn't be here. So I stepped aside. But a wise lawyer once told me that in any transaction you do, there's 25% that you have to have. And there's 25% that the other person has to have. And the other 50% really doesn't make a difference. He said, you obviously know you're 25%, but you really need to know the other guy's 25%. And this guy could complete deals much faster than anybody, because Neil understood that. And one of the things I looked for in a partner is, did that partner understand the 25-25 proposition? And I had the unfortunate mistake of partnering with a couple of people whose attitude was, I'm going to get my 25, I'm going to get the 50, I want your 25. And oh, by the way, the signed document, it's just a suggestion. It's not, is it right or it's wrong? It's, can I get away with it? There's a common concept in marketing called product differentiation. You want to make your product unique. So you want your customer to want your product for any reason other than cheap price. You don't want to compete on price. So we built this building, and it was one of the first green buildings built in the country, and I'm evangelical about all this. Well, it turned out that the green aspects had nothing to do with the success of the building. When we built the building, and it came time to discuss parking lot lighting, the only type of parking lots that I knew were regional mall parking lots, because that's where I was trained at the Rouse Company. That's what we did. So it was a 10-minute conversation, not about the strength or the height of the light poles, but where to put the lights. And that was it. So we built a building, and this tenant comes in, takes a full floor. So one of the things I like to try to do is circle back after the transaction with the broker. And I want to, sometimes you get the deal, sometimes you don't, but I want to know why. So I bought this guy lunch, and I said, so how do we get the deal? Why? He says, you'll never guess. And I'm like, should I immediately give up, or should I try a couple? So I tried a couple things. He says, nope, nope, nope. I said, well, what was it? He said, your parking lot lights. I said, what do you mean? He said, I don't know why you put them in, but they look like they were designed to light up the parking lot of a regional mall. Like, yep. Well, it turned out that this company is international. They have employees going back and forth to the office 24/7, which means people are coming and going in the middle of the night. Safety is a big concern for them. So they look at the other competing office buildings, but they have their fancy little, tiny lights, and they get to our place, which is lit up. And they're like, this is where we're going. Real estate is no different than any other business. It's constantly changing, in large part due to changes in technology, but for all sorts of other reasons. And if you want to be good at your craft, you want to stay on the cutting edge of your business, you have to constantly re-educate yourself. And the best way to do that is to just open yourself up to other people and go to environments where people are talking about what they're doing and where they're very willing to answer questions.
And mistakes they've made.
And mistakes they've made. So for me, in commercial real estate, the Urban Land Institute turned out to be the place to go. And they have meetings twice a year, as well as local meetings. I go early, I stay late, and I try to not schedule any meetings while I'm there. And I try to just be around people who I think are really smart. If there's somebody I want to ask a question to, I go up and ask them. And one of the nice things about ULI is that if you are approached and you are asked a question, you are obligated to give a complete, thoughtful, and honest answer. So the first meeting I ever go to, we were thinking of building one of these newfangled flex buildings. And the guy who started this was a guy named John Reynolds from Palo Alto, California. So we're at this meeting in Philadelphia, and oh my gosh, there goes John Reynolds. So it was, why not me time? Jump up, introduce myself, and said, we would like to build one of these buildings that you pioneered in California. Is there a time when we could get together and talk? And John looks at his watch and says, I've got a half an hour. How about now? So, that half an hour was a godsend. We got a quick tutorial and went back to the drawing boards in Baltimore and produced a building that was, new to the market and worked out great.